And if you're just logging in, we'll get started in just a second as more folks join us. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you this evening. All right, we will go ahead and dive in as folks continue to join us. Hi, I'm Julia with Politics and Prose. We're live discussing the Best American Mystery and Suspense 2021 with editor Steph Cha and Alafair Burke, alongside contributing writers Faye Snowden and Aya De Leon. We're also in partnership with Crime Writers of Color this evening, supporting over 300 of today and tomorrow's crime writers of color. You can find links in the chat for more information and to purchase your copy of the book directly from Politics and Prose. If you have a question for anyone this evening, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We'll move to questions in the last portion of the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time to get to everyone. Additionally, we're glad to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To enable captions, click the CC live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. We do want to thank everyone out there for joining us this evening. We are so grateful to our family of loyal customers keeping our business and our spirits afloat. Without further suspense, let's talk about the book. I'm going to quote here, "Crime writers, forgive the pun, are killing it right now creatively," writes guest editor Alafair Burke in her introduction. "It was difficult, painful even, to narrow this year's Best American Mystery and Suspense to only 20 stories. Spanning from a mediocre spa in Florida to New York's gritty East Village to death row in Alabama, this collection reveals boundless suspense in small, quiet moments, offering startling twists in the least likely of places. From a powerful response to hateful bullying, to a fight for healthcare, to a gripping desperation to vote, these stories are equal parts shocking, devastating, and enthralling, revealing the tension pulsing through our everyday lives and affirming that mystery and suspense writing is better than ever before." I can't speak highly enough of the talent represented by this panel. I'll be linking to more of their work in the chat, so please check that out. But for now, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose Live, Steph Cha, Alafair Burke, Faye Snowden, and Aya De Leon. Thank you all so much for being here.
Everybody.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So great to be here.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Steph Cha, and I'm the series editor of the Best American Mystery and Suspense Anthology. I'm just going to start by giving like a brief summary of like what it is that that this anthology entails. It is in my opinion and Alafair's opinion, 20 of the best stories published in the mystery and crime genre in 2020. To get to these 20, I called through probably thousands of stories published by American authors or authors residing in America in American publications, both in print and online. And I went through those stories and I picked about 50 of my favorites. And I asked my friend Alafair, who is just a wonderful writer and reader who I respect, to be my first guest editor, and she obliged, which I'm still thankful for. And so I passed those stories to her, and she picked the 20. This was during a time when we weren't really seeing a lot of people. It was really last winter and beginning of this year that we were doing the selection, and it's just nice to have a friend to chat stories with, and someone who we could look at these stories with and be like, whoa, look at all this incredible talent. And so we're also just thrilled to share these stories with all of you, because I think the writers represented in this book, including Faye and Aya, are just so gifted and have just so much to say in the most creative ways. Alafair, did you want to add anything about your experience as series editor or about the book? I know that Julia read from your wonderful intro.
I have nothing to say. She took my best time. No, mostly, Steph, I'm going to continue to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be the guest editor of this esteemed series, but also to your first guest editor with you as the series lead at this point. It was to see my name with the long list of previous guest editors is kind of like, these are the people I grew up reading, and kind of, to have shared a job with them is pretty a huge honor. But I mean, what a job, because it's like, if you could call it work, because I think the guest editor has the best gig around, right? Steph is the one calling through, trying to find every short story that you might call a mystery or suspense story published in an entire year. And then she's culling it down to 50. I mean, but what a lucky girl I am that, I got 50 hand curated stories sent to me, and there wasn't a dud in the bunch. And, I was just delightfully happy. And when it came time for me to write the introduction for this anthology, I was like, what am I going to say? And I'm like, I'll go back and look at my notes, as I was just my immediate reaction as I was looking at the stories and the kinds of things I'd write. It was awful. It was just like, amazing, great. I can't believe this. This is so damn good. This one definitely belongs in there. It was just like one good story after the others. And so I had to kind of struggle to get it down to 20. And so I do encourage people to not only get the collection and read the 20, but there's an extended list in the back of the stories that, I kept asking Steph, are you sure we can't do like 22, 23? And it's like, no, 20, hard 20. But I encourage people to seek out the other stories as well. And it's just a reminder of how much short fiction is out there that may not be on our radar every day.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't been aware of the amount of quality short fiction out there, and I feel like this job has changed the way I read, and it's really a ton of fun. I've gotten to experience more writers than I ever have before, and so that's been a real pleasure. And so I'd like to bring Aya and Faye in. We're going to have them read to us like little pieces from their stories, so you can get a taste, and then we're all going to talk. Aya's unmuted, so I'm going to pick on Aya first.
Darn, the danger of unmuting. No, I'm ready. So this story is called Frederick Douglass Elementary, and it's from Berkeley Noir, and it takes place in the West. It's oriented to the West Berkeley Flatlands. Keisha waited until everyone else left the office. It was Friday night and nobody seemed to be working late. Still, she shoved her sweatshirt up against the bottom of the door in case any light could be seen. Only then did she turn on the fluorescent light in the windowless copy room. A few weeks before, she had swiped a contract on letterhead from a real estate agency. Earlier that day, she had borrowed a coworker's computer to write the fake lease for a rental apartment. She had copied the language off the internet, but was anxious about any spelling or grammatical errors, especially because she couldn't save a forged document on a company computer. She had sat at her data entry cubicle during lunch, reading the words over and over until they blurred, proofreading it to the best of her ability. That night in the copy room, she cut and pasted and made copies of copies until she had a reasonable looking forgery on fine linen paper. She squinted at it in the glaring fluorescent. It looked legit. It proved that she rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Berkeley. Keisha and her 7-year-old son, Marchand, lived in Holloway, a few towns north of Berkeley, just past Richmond at the end of the BART line. Holloway's student population was nearly all Black and Latino, but the teachers were predominantly white. All of the schools were performing far below the national average, and the district was on the verge of bankruptcy. Her son had been bullied by bigger boys, and one of the teachers had been fired for hitting a student. Apparently, the administration had tolerated it for years, but one of the staff had caught it on video, and it had gone viral on social media. That was the last straw. Keisha wasn't going to allow her son to be in a school where white teachers were physically abusive, but she couldn't afford private school. Even a partial scholarship was out of the question. Bay Area rents were exorbitant. When she first got pregnant with Marchand, she and her boyfriend had a great 1.5-bedroom apartment in Richmond. She was working at the law office doing data entry. Her boyfriend was working as a security guard at the mall. They had enough income to save for the baby. But one night, her boyfriend got stopped by the cops for no apparent reason. Ultimately, he was hauled off for resisting arrest and arrest, and battery on an officer. The dashboard cams, however, had been turned off. They beat him badly enough that he was in the hospital for a week. Then he was locked up. Keisha gave up the apartment and moved in with her mom in Holloway. She was numb with grief for the first couple weeks. Then she cried for another month. Girl, her mother had told her 2 weeks before her due date, you need to stop all that crying and get ready to have this baby. Her ex-boyfriend's mom called after the video went viral of the teacher hitting the student. One of my friends from church called me, said the woman who would have been her mother-in-law. She asked me, isn't that your grandson's school in Holloway? The two of them talked, and Marshawn's grandmother offered Keisha the use of her address to get Marshawn into the Berkeley public schools. They had much better test scores, and Berkeley was the first district in the U.S. to voluntarily desegregate in the 1960s. They wouldn't have crazy white teachers hitting the kids. The mother-in-law put Keisha's name on her energy bill to document her residency, and Keisha breathed a sigh of relief. But when she went to the district office to figure out how to register her son for school, there was much more documentation required. So I'll stop there.
That's so great. I love this story so much. I'm going to ask you more about it, but let's hear from Faye, and then I'm going to quiz both of you about where these stories came from, because they're brilliant.
All right, thank you. I'll get started. And I'm just so honored to be here. So let's go ahead. So the story is called One Bullet, One Vote. And I'm going to start kind of in the middle and just read a couple pages. So Lionel, do I have to remind you what happened to my grandfather? Emma said. That knocked the wind out of him. He sat back in his chair and sighed and picked up a fork and then threw it down again. That was a long time ago, from a tree. That's not now. They burned him first, alive. Then they strung him up and cut pieces off him so they could remember it by. You think his screaming was enough for them to remember it by, Willie Mae said, the memory making her blood rise. Ever since he died, she stayed on the right side of white folk. Now at the end of her life, maybe she could give them something to chew on once she was no longer around. And he wasn't trying to register to vote. He was just trying to get a fair price for his crop, Emma said. Emma, done with the talking, got up and started stacking the empty plates. But Willie Mae wasn't at all done. Hell, she hadn't even started. She lifted her old polished hickory cane and thumped 3 times on the wooden floor. They turned to look at her. Finally, how y'all finished talking and nobody asked me? Emma's right, Lionel said, wiping his hands over his face. Too dangerous. Time's not right. Willie Mae laughed. Being Black and living is dangerous. What I have to do? According to the package, Willie Mae waved her hand. Stop all that. You make the laws those scoundrels pass sound like they fair. Just say what the white folk want for our God-given rights. You have to register, Lionel said slowly, but there are rules. Rules? We have to hunt down the registrar first, Big Mama. They change them all the time, and they hide out so Black people can't find them, Emma said. Willie Mae didn't miss the tiredness in her granddaughter's voice. Emma knew as soon as Willie Mae thumped her cane that she had lost. Don't worry about that. I'll find the no account. What else? You have to take a test, Lionel said. I'm sorry, I kind of lost my place here on this Kindle. Let me see. I am sorry, guys. I hope that it does. It looks like that that's the end of that section, but I don't understand why. Let me do one thing here to see if I can get it back. Hang on, hang on. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, and then he says, you have to take a test, Lionel said. Sorry about that. We'll get back into the fictional dream here. I've been taking tests all my life, son, and be of good character. What in the dog's hell is that supposed to mean? No kids out of wedlock, No breaking any laws, not even to protest, Lionel said. Never protested a damn thing. Too busy keeping folks already here alive and bringing in the new ones. Besides, if I ever need something they don't want to give me, I get it through sneak. They don't even know they're giving it to me. Well, as long as your sneak didn't get you arrested and you passed the test, you can register to vote. What kind of things on the test? Stuff about the United States, the government. She sat back, her cane leaning between her legs. Well, that don't sound too hard to me. Both Lionel and Emma sat there not talking. Willie Mae fancied she could smell something on the silence, and it wasn't the leavings of Sunday dinner. Blood, grief maybe. Somehow Lionel caught a whiff of it too, because he said, "You sure you know what you're getting into, Big Mama?" She looked him in his young eyes. "I always know what I'm putting on the line, son. Do you?"
Mm.
So good.
Oh, that's so good.
I
I love that last line, last line of that section. Yeah, so do you all want to talk about, kind of where these stories came from? I know that I know that Frederick Douglass Elementary was in Berkeley Noir, and that One Bullet, One Vote was what in the Low Down Dirty Vote anthology.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe talk about those anthologies and were you asked to contribute, and where did the kind of seeds for these stories come from? Maybe Aya, you can start.
Sure. So, I grew up in Berkeley. I'm like a, Berkeley writer. And so when Berkeley Noir was coming out, a few different people were like, you got to write a story, you got to write a story. And, as a genre writer, I've been on a genre clock, writing a book a year. I teach, I'm a mom. And I was like, oh, I can't do it. But it was one of those things I really wanted to do. Like, I love Akashic. I love the Noir anthology series. And it was like, this was my shot. So fortunately, they kept bugging me. And eventually there was like, a little gap between like blah, blah for this book was done and the semester was blah, blah, and the kid was going to camp or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And at the time, I've got, we were going to a public school in Oakland. I live in Berkeley, but we were going to a public school in Oakland because Berkeley has become so much less racially diverse than my childhood, but I found this public school in Berkeley closer to home that I wanted to go to. And so I was literally trying to register my kid for school in Berkeley, where I had lived for multiple decades, and I could not document my residency without forging some of the papers, even though I had lived here for many decades. And, and one of the reasons for that is that here in the East Bay, there are a number of different school districts, and they have really, really different sets of resources based in race and class and other complicated factors. And so people are always trying to get into the Berkeley district. So, I write heist, and I was thinking about like, ooh, what about a heist? And then, what would be the dynamics and politics of that? So I got interested in this idea of a heist, and the elementary school that I was envisioning as Frederick Douglass Elementary is actually called BAM, Berkeley Arts Magnet, which is a school I went to as a child and my kid went to for a couple of weeks before we transferred to the school that I wanted. So it very much was taken out of my real life, because it's like a CIA background check to get into this school. It's really extreme.
How about you, Faye? Where did these
really
people come from?
Well, I was invited to submit to Low Down Dirty Vote by the editor, Misty Berry. I had known her when I was writing back in the mid 2000s. And so, I was happy to do it. Misty's a really good friend in the writing world. And the story came to me from my family, I guess. We have always been taught that the right to vote was not only our responsibility, but it was our sacred responsibility, because our ancestors are, not that far back. When I say ancestors, I don't mean like a couple hundred years ago. I mean like in the 50s and 60s, paid for that in blood. And so I was kind of thinking about that. And I also want to tell more stories about that struggle, the struggle for human rights in this country. Because a lot of people say, that we're done with that. Why are we still talking about that? And I don't believe we've done enough. I would like to see more fiction exploring that subject and that history. And so that's why I wrote the story, because I wanted to kind of explore that time period and explore that struggle. And during the time that we were going through with all the voting and this accusation of voting fraud and just the suppression of the vote, I kind of wanted to tell myself the story again, and also tell everyone else who would read the story again that this is not something that didn't come without price and consequence, right? People paid for this with their lives. And I remember telling my son something this weekend about the freedom riders. Those young people had to write wills before they actually got on the road. And so and I don't know how many people know that or not, but I just think that we need to know that, and we need to hold the right to vote to be sacred. And that's how the story came about.
Yeah, and obviously that struggle is still ongoing.
Yes. Yes.
I think.
Hey, you're correct that people said, "Oh, we're past that. We were closer to past it 20 years ago than we are past it now." It's like we're going, and you can draw kind of a connection between the two, because you're talking about school equality, and Faye, you're talking, and it's so linked, right? Look at what they're doing now to turn out the vote in some ways and suppress it in other ways. And turning school curricula into into a weapon, and getting started. I think that your stories are so important, kind of reminding people that these powerful motivations. Sorry, Steph. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, please cut in whenever you want. Your stories too, I hadn't even thought of them as part of the set in this way, but they actually we're speaking to a lot of the same things. And I think Alafair and I have talked about this, right? And I think if you read our introduction and forward, we discuss what makes a story a best story, right? And I think so much of it comes down to personal taste, and my personal taste, kind of the stories that really speak to me tend to be the ones that connect crime with what we see going on around us, in our world, especially when you're talking about a national anthology, right? You're talking about best American stories. I like to see stories that kind of speak to what it is to be American, that kind of speak to that experience. And, that's such a broad topic, but I do think that it very much includes politics, and obviously we are here, due to the generosity of the Politics and Prose bookstore. I think that there is I think in a lot of genres, politics and fiction are considered, it's kind of a uneasy marriage. But I think that in crime fiction in particular, it makes sense to have politics in our work, because we deal with crime and we deal with death, and those are political topics. And I've actually heard and read Aya speak about this, and I kind of wanted to ask both of you. I know Aya, you write. Actually, your novels are kind of different in tone from the Frederick Douglass Elementary, but because they're Frederick Douglass Elementary is, I wouldn't describe it as a fun, upbeat story. It's a fantastic story, but you write these fun heist thrillers, and you're also an activist and an academic, and I've seen you talk very smartly about that connection, and and Faye, I'm sure you have thoughts on this too. Can you talk about kind of the role that politics plays in your work, both within short stories and in your larger careers?
I can, and I have an interesting take on that. Maybe it's more like the Toni Morrison take on it, where there is no way as Willie May would say, in a dog's hell, right, that you can separate politics from your work. The mere fact that you try to do it says something political about your work, right? So I've always believed, and especially in literature, that no matter what, it's the politics of, and call it politics, whatever, but the race, right? Socioeconomic standing, the class, all that shows up in literature, because it is a reflection of our, I know it sounds trite to say, but it is truly a reflection of our society. It is what either reflecting what our society really is, or it's a wish, what we wish our society would be. And I've always felt like that. I'm one of those people, I kind of look back and I used to ask my parents, and I'll just quit, but I used to ask my parents, well, what did you do during the civil rights movement? What were you doing? And my mom was like, well, I was going to work and raising you guys by myself, because she raised 6 kids. But my dad was like, well, I was in every movement. He was like the guy in The Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison. He was in all these movements. I mean, he was a Black Muslim. He was a Black Panther. He did it all. And I'm more like in my life is that I get up every morning and I go to work. I take care of my family. I scream at the TV. I throw things and I write. And I believe it's just like again, because I love Toni Morrison. She's one of my favorite writers. But I believe what she says, that when things get this tough, it's time for writers, what the gift, or if you have, the gift or whatever you have, it's time for you to go to work. And that's what you can do. So when I'm older and then my grandkids ask me, well, grandma, or my dear, that's what we're called in Louisiana, what do you want? What did you do? And I can say, well, I wrote, and I tried to tell the story, and I tried to make a difference that way. And I had to go to a couple protests and hold up signs and stuff, but yeah, but I'm doing what I know best, I guess.
Well, one of the things I have to say, one of the things that I love about your story, Faye, is that there's a way that those kinds of stories are often not seen as crime fiction, right? Because part of what you have in those dynamics in like really intense racism in the South is there isn't any mystery. There's no mystery. There's nothing to like investigate and find out because everybody knows who did it. And the issue isn't like, can we figure out who did it? The issue is that there's no actual will to punish the people who did it because given racism, it isn't actually seen as a crime. And that was one of the things that, the collection was just incredible.
It was.
And I remember when I got the email, I was like, what? It took me a minute to process it. Like, oh my God, my story's been picked. This is amazing. And the collection is so good. And the stories are so different, and kind of like the ways that they even have a sense of crime, and like what crime is. Like some of them you're kind of going along and you're like, oh, this is a short story. And then I'm like, is there a crime? Then I'm like, oh yeah, there's definitely crime. So they really vary, but that was one of the things that was really fascinating to me because this story for me felt like the way that it landed in my experience of literature, it landed as part of a tradition of Black literature talking about our struggle as opposed to crime literature. And I thought it was incredible, you all as editors really thinking about this as a crime story because of course it is, right? And it has to do with interrogating different parts of US history in a way that I thought was really, really powerful. But yeah, it's true. My own work, like this was different. Like this was more noir for me. My general style is I write very political stories. I write heist stories. Now I've started sort of shifting into writing spy stories, and they're all, they're kind of capery and they're quirky. And there's like, a crew of people who are like, let's redistribute wealth, and they go into it. But my sense as an activist, and I love what you were saying, Faye, about like, what are we envisioning as writers? And so for me as an activist, my style of writing is really hopeful. Like I write stories that are very hopeful. I write stories of people who win. Some of them have, romance in them, and it's, people, it works out, and that's been something I've really doubled down on as I'm writing about the climate crisis, right? Because the climate crisis is the biggest downer, of our time for our species. But I actually believe that we can figure this out, because we have the solutions. What we don't have is the political will. And the way that you get the political will is encouraging people to become active. And you can't get people active with a downer, storyline. And so, my big thing about it really is like, I'm writing stories that are giving us a chance to practice putting our mind into winning, and what would it look like to win around climate justice, and what would it look like to win around racial justice, around wealth redistribution. So that's kind of what I see myself writing into. And this particular story, has more of a noir twist in terms of, and I think that is really where it's connected to Faye's story from the 60s. Like, school integration was this big dream, and kind of, how's that going, right? So that's what this story was looking at.
Yeah, I come from a noir background, so hearing you talk about that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is like like I should try that. Giving people something to hope for. I think that's such a wonderful way to approach writing. I also, do you think of yourselves as novelists, short story writers? Like, because I personally, and I imagine Alafair that you're the same. Like, I'm a novelist. Like, when I write a short story, it's because like someone asked me to write a short story and I force myself to do it. Is that how you are, Alafair?
Yeah, and you and I talked about that as maybe it's not that much of a surprise that the 20 best short stories, like your average crime reader probably has only heard of a handful of them. Yeah. And it's not just, here's every short story written by a best-selling top novelist, because we're not necessarily like putting all of our everything into a short story necessarily if it's kind of a one-off thing. I don't mean, I've liked the short stories I've written, and I've even been in this anthology one time, but it's, it's not that it's not deserved, but it's a different form of to pack a lot of story into 10,000 words is a lot different than doing it in 80,
Yeah. No,
and
that's
follow up on Steph. So do you guys think of yourselves primarily as novelists, or are you just writers and your form changes, or?
I think of myself as a writer. As a matter of fact, not a novelist or a short story, because I write poems too and poetry. I wrote lots of that teenage angst poetry, like that Sylvia Plath hand to the forehead stuff when I was younger. But I remember when I took over my Google panel, and that site on when you Google you, and there's a panel that you as an author can kind of take over and tell them what you are and what you do. And I told them I was a writer, and they came back and told me I was a novelist. And I told them I was a writer again, and they came back.
So I'm
hoping that this time I got my writer.
Writers, but not all writers are novelists.
Exactly. It was kind of funny. I was arguing with them. Yeah.
Well, I definitely do think of myself as a novelist, and I think, I do write the occasional poem. I definitely write essays and, kind of a memoir, but I definitely think of myself as a novelist. And I think for me, just I'm extroverted, which I understand is unusual for writers. And having the attention span to write a whole novel is so hard won for me. I don't actually think that being a novelist means that it's like the be all end all, or it's like, that it means that you have to be a better writer than anything else. But for me personally, developing the attention span to write a novel was like a lifelong journey that took me decades. So I feel like it's very hard won. I'm super proud of being able to do it. So I think of myself as a novelist, but I write a little more nonfiction and essays, a lot of tweets, and I rarely write short stories. Like from the beginning, the ideas that I had were always novel ideas, and I'd be trying to make it be a short story, and people were like, no, you have to actually unpack this. So I tend to think in these kind of bigger, more complicated stories that you can't really get through in 1,000 or even 10,000 words.
Yeah, I think that is why I think of myself as a novelist, because every short story I've ever written feels like a treatment for like a larger story. And with both of your stories, I thought like I'd love to see more of these characters. Like I feel like there's a feeling that like it's part of like a larger piece, and I'd be like really happy to spend like 300 pages with these people. Like because I just feel like you develop a voice. You develop like, Willie Mae has like such a particular way of speaking, the way that Frederick Douglass Elementary ends is just like so fraught. And have you considered spinning these out into longer works, or is this, or when you're done with the story, you're just done?
Well, the thing that I will say that started happening for me is I have these imaginary worlds in my head, and so like, people talk about the Marvel universe. Well, in my head, I have what I think of as the Justice Hustlers universe. And so this series that I started, it lives in my mind in a parallel universe. So for example, the town of Holloway is the town that my latest spy novel is set in. It's a fictional town in the Bay Area. It doesn't exist. Holloway, California. And like, there's something about having these fictional worlds in my head that I can then just I've set things up in this town and then I'm like, oh, these people, this can be a Holloway story, right? And so then it becomes a Holloway story. I don't know that I have anywhere in my mind for Keisha and Marshawn to go, but I definitely feel like they're part of this world of these different stories that I'm telling. And my characters will pop up in different stories. So like in one of the books that I'm working on now, the protagonist of one, I'm like, oh, we need a lawyer. I'm like, oh, call so-and-so. Like, it's as if in my mind that these people exist and I can like, be in this book. And they're like, yeah, I'm not too busy that week. So it's weird. It's like, I think that's what it is for me, and that might be what people are feeling, that there's like more story there. I don't know if it's those characters, but it's definitely like, it's that world.
I'm really glad I heard that barking dog because my grandbaby just woke up from his nap and starting to cry, so I don't feel so alone. But yeah, but no, with this story, usually when I'm writing a novel, the character's like sitting there talking to me. Like my serial killer from A Killing Fire kind of sat down with his fedora and his wife's, hat and its peacock feather, and well, are you going to see me through, Faye? And I kind of had to see him through. But these characters are gone for me. I don't think I would. I'm not going to say never, but I do see, right now, not right now, I would say. I don't think about it. But if they start, showing up in different places or maybe in different works, or I would probably consider it. Yeah.
I see that we actually have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I'm gonna take a few of these. I think we have a question from Craig Sisterson. Hi, Craig. This is for me and you, Alafair. You're both very well versed in crime writing as acclaimed authors and longtime readers, but by going through this process of reading through so many diverse short stories to put the collection together, have you found your own views evolving in any way on what crime fiction can do, how far it can reach, or how it can be used to explore a variety of topics? Alafair, do you want to start?
I don't know if it's changed my view, because I've always thought crime fiction has been a good vehicle for exploring societal things you want to think about and talk about. I think the trick is just, it can't be the one thing about it can't be the motivating reason for an entire book, right? You still need characters that people care about, but you can, I think both of your stories are examples of this. You're using a societal problem to shape motivations, right? And then you still have, that can't be the story in and of itself. You have to put people that readers care about into that situation and use those characters as a way to explore the societal situation you want to talk about, and use that societal situation to put pressure on your characters, right? So it's all symbiotic. I do think, Craig, that I think just increasingly, if you look at like the best reviewed books right now in crime fiction, like the genre is changing. Like to the extent people used to read like, oh, I like mysteries or thrillers as a form of escapism. Like that doesn't seem to be what readers want right now. Like they're not flocking to books about like, beautiful people on a luxury cruise ship and someone dies and it's a closed room whodunit. Like those books are super fun to read and I still like them, but it's not what's really pulling people in right now. People want a little realism in their stories. At the same time, they don't want to be that. That's not the reason to read the story, though. Does that make sense? Steph, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say doing this has kind of pushed out my understanding of the short mystery story, the short crime story. It's interesting because I think that the short story form takes away a lot of the tools that crime writers rely on, because you can't have like super intricate plotting or like cool moves in the same way. You just have less room to maneuver in a short story. So it's been cool to see the way that people approach that. I'm actually like extra impressed when I see a really well plotted whodunit in 3,000 words. It's really hard to do. There aren't that many in the collection. There are a few, but like but you know, that kind of the traditional mystery tent poles. You know, you have to work around them. You can use some of them, you can't use all of them. And so I think the agility that I've seen from crime writers has been really interesting, you know, and I think, you know, this collection and the reading that we've done has been diverse in all the ways. You know, I feel like when we talk about diversity, it's often shorthand for racial diversity, but like I really mean, like, you know, I have more familiarity with like every subgenre in crime than I did, you know, 2 years ago, right? And it's just been really illuminating seeing the range of things that people can do in this enormous umbrella, you know. And so that's been fun, you know. And I think it's just, there's so much of it that, you know, it has to be evolving because there's so much energy in there.
Yeah.
And
Just a couple, just real quick. I know we're highlighting you too. We love your two stories, but you know, the whole collection has familiar names in it. But to the extent there are some stories that have a lot of plot, like packed into relatively few pages, they really took risks with structures. Like I feel like Laura Lippman's story and Jenny Bott's story, Return to India, like they were both using something outside of just traditional narrative, like text messages and emails, like kind of like pasting together like this whodunit in sort of non-traditional ways. And I think short fiction lets people get really clever with structure.
I have a question from an anonymous attendee that I'm going to go because it kind of speaks to something Alafair was saying. There's a huge trend in topical true crime / realistic fiction writing about very plausible events right now. Do you think it helps people pay attention to current events when they read about fictional corruption, exploitation, grifting, etc.? Did anyone have thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I'll just jump in and say quickly, one of the things that has been really important to me as a climate fiction writer is that climate fiction has for a long time been about kind of dystopic futures after, you know, we kind of blow it now and then like the planet is half flooded or whatever it is. And so it's really interesting. I've been like, my fascination as a climate fiction writer and in organizing climate writers is to really push people to write about climate here and now, you know, that like, what is it that we want to happen now to avoid those things as opposed to jumping into the future? Because I think that there's a particular tension that our species and certainly our nation is in around the climate crisis. Like, can we pay attention to it? And can we fight the fights that we need to fight to win? And it feels like part of the focus in the future is like, it's so hard to pay attention to that. It's hard to push past our hopelessness about it. And it's easier to imagine like, well, we lost, but we survived. And then what do we do? Right. So that's one of my obsessions lately is climate fiction in the here and now.
Yeah. I think stories change us, all kinds of stories, and it changes the society. It changes the way we think. So I do think that when we write stories and people read them, there is some type of change that takes place, whether for better or worse. So I do think that reading stories about something that's happened maybe in the past or even something that's happening now, and it has to do with, I'll say, politics or something like our human rights, or I think that does, we're very divisive right now, especially in this country, so I don't know, but I would hope that it would have us think differently. If you would ask me 2 years ago, I was like, oh yeah, stories change us. Look at Uncle Tom's Cabin. Look at the guy that did who did the Carl? It wasn't Sandberg, but about the meat. Upton Sinclair.
Upton Sinclair.
Yes, yeah. Look at all that. But now I would say, oh no, because people are kind of stuck in their echo chambers. But I hope that I'm going to keep that as a hope. I'm going to take Aya's feeling of positive, being positive, and say yes.
There's another question from Barbara Howard Phipps that kind of relates to this. what reaction do you want from your readers? Emotions or activism? Or I mean, and I'm curious too if that varies from project to project. Do you have kind of an overwhelming response that you're looking for when you write? Like, do you write to somebody?
I mean, I'll say I definitely, it does vary from project to project, and I want different things. But, you know, as I begin obsessively focusing on the climate crisis, one of the big things that shifted for me this year was I wrote a young adult thriller about the Green New Deal, about, you know, and again, winning these two undocumented Dominican teenagers who like uncover a Senate kidnapping plot to stop the Green New Deal. And I had a young adult book under contract, so I had an editor to go to, and I was like, this is too urgent to go to the publishing industry. Like, I want this out there now when the Green New Deal is being discussed, when we have, like, you know, we're in the first year of the Biden administration. So I chose to have it published serially online. And it's now on Orion Magazine, free, no paywall, open to all, you know, because I really think of myself as writing propaganda. Like, this is propaganda for the Green New Deal. It's fun, it's youthful, it's, you know, it's exciting, it's a thriller. But, you know, so that's a place where I clearly want activism. I want people to know about the Green New Deal, to think about it, to feel like it could happen, to have a story in their mind where people fought and won. So that's definitely like sort of both the emotion around hopefulness, but the activism around like, I have an agenda.
And I agree with Aya. It varies from project to project. With my short fiction, because I don't have to adhere to, you know, a lot of the rules that you have to do when you're writing mystery or thriller or serial killer, I'm kind of taking more of a leeway in exploring our past, or, you know, through that, the past that I care about. I think that, though, what I would want people to do is to think, you know, to think about something different, to think differently. Whether or not that's to do, you know, I hope they would, but that's not, I want them to kind of to know, I guess, more than anything, especially with these stories that I wrote, the One Bullet, One Vote, that I wrote. And I don't want them to think, oh my goodness, this was terrible, and I can't believe all that happened back then. Yeah, that was those poor people. I want them to think that this was messed up, and I'm going to see what I can do. So I guess I do want them to act to make sure that this never happens again. And one of the reasons that I put that period in between One Bullet, One Vote, and everybody was trying to put a comma in there for me, is that those two things should never go together, right? We should never have to go to war in order to vote. I mean, and so that's probably the reason. So I put that there. And then I have another short story that was just accepted that's based on what had happened when we bombed our own folks in West Philly. And a lot of people don't even know about that. So I want them to read that and go, that really happened? And I want them to Google it, and I want them to know and think and act differently, maybe. So that's it. That's a long-winded answer to your question, Steph.
I mean, you all talked about Toni Morrison earlier. You know, I kind of understand why people are scared of Toni Morrison. You know, I read Song of Solomon for the first time this year, and you know that rewires your brain. I mean, and you know, talk about a novelist who also, you know, she's not considered a crime writer, but I think we have some claim on her. So,
yeah, Solomon. It's got definite mystery elements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
as well as Beloved. I mean, that whole thing is built around crime, right? A crime, right? Or some would think of as a crime.
I mean, and suspense too. I mean, there's that book was utterly mind bending. And actually, so I'm gonna put together two questions, both from anonymous attendees. Do you have any go-to mystery, suspense, thriller, crime shows that you love? And also, what's the last book you read that had you on the edge of your seat? Let's do some recommendations.
Gosh.
I'll jump in first with the book and say, like, My Sister the Serial Killer by
Oh my God.
So good.
So good.
Get over that book. Oh my God. So
good.
Take a minute to think about TV, but that's the book that, like, I can't get over.
Yeah. So for favorite crime shows right now, it's hard for me, like The Fall with the woman that played on the X-Files. Oh my God, I love that show. I loved her stiletto heels and her high heels and her badass. Like, I love that show. The other one, though, I'm really kind of jonesing over is Big Sky. That ABC show with, I guess it was CG based on novels by CJ Fox. For books to read, that is really kind of, let me think about that one for a second. It's so hard to even kind of say which ones that you like because you don't want to, it's really hard to choose. It's like asking your favorite child.
I read Wanda Morris's book just came out. All Her Little Secrets is really good. The Collective by Allison Galen, I cannot put that book down. And then for TV shows, is there something I'm really loving? I hate everybody on it, but I really like that show Succession, and I would call them, it's a crime show because they're all basically criminals. Like, I don't know if they've killed anybody yet, but and I like that Mayor of Easttown.
Oh yeah, that was a good one. Yeah. And then for books, I'd have to say These Toxic Things by Rachel Halley Hall was really good. Yeah.
I just finished watching the first season of, I think it's The Morning Show, which again, like, isn't really seen. It's not officially a crime show, but it's, it's basically about, criminal behavior in the '2 era. I'm not super hopeful for the second season because, when you have that kind of incredible storytelling with such a sharp arc in season 1, it's going to be really hard.
A show I think people missed was Little Fires Everywhere, and
that was great.
And like, people don't think of that book as necessarily crime fiction, but I think it's exactly what we were talking about before. Like that model of fiction that we've been talking about, it's squarely lands there, I think.
And Attica Locke wrote on that show.
Yeah.
And
I have to say that show around diversity was such a shocker in terms of the adaptation, right? Because we have, like, Hollywood has a tradition of sort of white and straight washing stories, and it was like the opposite, which was really interesting. That you had a book with a very prominent main character who was straight and white in the book, who ended up being queer and of color in the sort of screen adaptation. And that, to me was sort of like a wake-up call, like, wow, everything hasn't changed, but something has really changed, that this is the kind of change that would happen in an adaptation. It was really, really an interesting watershed moment for me as a viewer.
Yeah, I really like that show.
White Lotus is kind of subversive. Like it actually seems like just like this kind of, campy satire show set at like the Four Seasons, like beautiful Hawaii. But it's very subversive that it becomes it's very much about class and elitism and to some degree about race, but it just kind of sneaks up on you. It's like, oh, look at what they did there. And it's definitely got a more the end. Yeah.
I love that show. I'm going to recommend a few short story collections since I've been reading a lot of these. A few that came out this year. Palm Springs Noir is a Akashic Noir collection that came out this year. I love all Akashic Noir collections. I read all those for Best American, and they're consistently high quality, and they get really interesting contributors. That's Jukes and Tonks, crime fiction inspired by music in the dark and suspect choices. That was good. It's all like short stories set in kind of like these jukes and tonks, like these like kind of bars with jukeboxes, and a lot of music and noir shenanigans. And then Collectibles, which was edited by Lawrence Block, has a lot of really great stories. Shows, I'm kind of obsessed with Squid Game, which is, everyone watched that show. But, for me, I grew up watching Korean TV, and so this feels I feel like a personal level of victory in this. like, oh, everyone's on board now. And like, you know, when I was like 12, I'd have a crush on someone like Takesu, and I'd be like, and you know, no one could talk about it. And now you go on his Instagram, and it's just like, you know, thousands of people thirsting after him in English. It's really fun. So I love that show. I'm rewatching it right now with my husband because he didn't want to watch it, and now I'm making him watch it. I will say the like one part, there are a few things that I don't like about the show, and one of them is there's like a cop detection storyline that's more kind of traditional crime, and it's like really shoddily done, but it's still fun. He's like the worst cop ever, but he's played like a hero, you know? Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think we have time for I think one more question. So I'm gonna adapt this one from an anonymous attendee who asked, "Are there any plot lines you feel are worn out in mystery suspense writing?" So I will ask all of you that, but also, is there anything you'd like to see more of? Is there anything that's exciting you? You know, going into looking at kind of state of the genre and future of the genre.
I just want. Oh, go ahead, Aya.
Go ahead.
I just want more voices. I just want more diverse voices. I want them at the New York, on the bestsellers list. I want to read their stories. I want to get lost in them. I want to learn something. I want to be entertained. I would love that. I want them to turn all these, rules that we have about how a mystery should be written on their heads. I want them, I want to see new stuff. Yes. Thank you very much. Please and thank you.
Great question. I mean, I'll say a couple of things. The thing that I just have no more tolerance for is a certain kind of casual violence against women, and I think that we live in a society that has a lot of violence against women. So it's not about like not including it, right? It's about how do we write about it in a way that it's not casual, that it's not with a sort of a misogynist gaze. And that, for me is the thing we've had enough for all time already. And then the thing that I would really like to see that I think is so interesting is this question, there's been this call for, kind of police and prison abolition and defunding the police. And so I think it would be, this is a really interesting time to like imagine like what would it look like for sort of a community care, non-police group of people to be investigating something. That's actually happening here in Oakland. They're like mental health responders that have no affiliation with the police that you can call, to like get. So I'm really interested in sort of trying to imagine, what are we wanting to call into existence about responding to crime, and what would that investigation look like outside of the sort of current system. I think that's really interesting. I'm not that writer, but that writer is out there, so we do want to read that book, writer.
Yeah.
Alafair, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I will say, I just want to continue reading. There are very few storylines. I think I named one of them. There are very few things that are impossible to do well, and I'm always looking to see even the oldest stories in the book being reinterpreted in new ways. I always just want to see fresh voices, fresh talent. What I want to see is kind of rigorous thinking translated into very readable prose. That's basically always what I'm looking for, even if it reads super light and airy. Just seeing the kind of thought behind it is always fascinating for me. And it has been such a pleasure to hear you all speak. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you everyone for attending. This has been really fun for me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. This was awesome.
He's here.
I could not agree more. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Politics in Prose. I hope everyone out there like me just has their notepad, just like, everything I'm reading, everything I'm watching. This has been amazing and so much to think about. You were right. Our thanks to Steph Cha, Alafair Burke, Faye Snowden, Aya De Leon, crime writers of color, again, and our audience out there for tuning in with all of this love and these great questions. Please follow the link in the chat to purchase your copy of The Best American Mystery and Suspense 2021, or just visit us at politics-prose.com. While you're there, check out the rest of our events calendar. And I should mention, keep on the lookout. We'll be having an event for Alafair Burke's next book in the spring, so that'll be exciting. So stay tuned for that. And from our shelves to yours, everyone, we hope you're out there staying safe, staying strong, and of course, staying well read. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone.